I'm Barry with Applied Adhesives, and today we're going to be going over the 437 Big Bear, designed specifically for structural glazing silicones. So the first thing you want to do with this piece of equipment is plug in your air into the back. I recommend a 3/8 diameter inlet line or larger, and the fitting on the back is a 1/4 inch quick connect fitting on the back of it. Once I plug it into air, I'm going to register pressure here on my incoming pressure for this piece of equipment. You want to make sure that you're registering at least 100 psi coming in, and you've got plenty of airflow. Before I turn on the whole machine, I'm going to check both of my switches and make sure they're in the down position on both sides, and then I can turn on my main air to the machine. Once you hear that air equalize, then we can go over and we can just double check pneumatic pressures throughout the piece of equipment. So as I mentioned, the first one here should be resting somewhere between 100 and 120 psi, and that dictates the pressures throughout the entire pneumatic system. On your catalyst elevator here, we should have somewhere between 80 and 100 psi in this gauge, and the same thing with the base side, between 80 and 100 psi. Once we verify all of those pressures are in their range, we're okay to raise up these elevators on both sides so that we can load the chemical into the machine. One thing to note on this, both of these switches on both the 5-gallon and the 55-gallon, is that these switches have 3 positions. You have a full down position, you have a neutral position in the middle, and then the full up position. So at this moment, checking to make sure there's no obstructions above the elevators, I'm going to raise these into their full upright position. And the same thing with the 55-gallon drum. Once these are in the full upright position, they'll hold their position until I actuate that switch. And as I mentioned, you have a neutral position. I can put it into that position and it won't move, but as soon as I go down, that platen is going to start moving down in the down direction. So at this moment right now, I'm going to open my 5-gallon pail. I'm going to load my 5-gallon pail. Today we're running with Dow 983 structural silicone. I'm going to use a small screwdriver to remove the lid from the 5-gallon pail. On the curative side, always make sure to check your material manufacturer's recommendations. Most of them settle out and they require some mixing to incorporate any settled chemicals before you load it into the piece of equipment. Myself, I just use any kind of scrap metal and just incorporate any settled oil back into the chemical. You can also use a paddle attachment on the end of a drill for some chemicals if it's thin enough. Just be careful that you do not bring that paddle in and out of the chemical because it will introduce air into the chemical itself. At this point, we can load that 5-gallon bucket into the machine underneath the 5-gallon follower plate. When you're loading the 5-gallon pail into the machine, it's good to have a cup on hand and a roll of paper towels and a trash can to deal with the chemical as you prime the pump. This is a 2-stage process. You're going to prime the air out from underneath the follower plate with this valve here with your ball valve. And then step 2, once that's primed, we're going to prime the pump itself out of the bleeder valve in the side of the pump. So once we have this aligned, I'm going back to my elevator switch and I'm going to put this in the down position, making sure my pail is aligned. Before I fully submerge it, now that my pail is aligned, I'm going to open this valve. I'm going to use my cup to catch any material that's coming out of this valve. You'll get some spits of air, it'll run smoothly, and then shut that valve off. That's step 1. Step 2 is going to prime the pump out of the needle valve on the side. The exit of this valve is right underneath. There's a port underneath that valve. You open that a turn and a half or so. Now that this valve is open, and I can hold my cup under that valve to catch fluid flowing out. At this point, to actuate this air motor, I'm going to actuate my valve up above it on the main air manifold. This valve right here, if I open this valve, it's going to provide air to my air motor and cycle my pump up and down. And I'm going to use my hand to control the opening of that valve. I'm not going to open it all the way. I just want to throttle it open to control the speed of this pump and get a nice smooth flow of chemical out of my bleeder valve. Once the material is flowing smoothly, shut off your air valve and then shut off the bleeder valve in the side of the pump. Before you load the 55-gallon drum into the piece of equipment, take the top retainer band off and the lid and place it to the side. I'm using a drum that's already been opened, but when you open these for the first time, you're going to pull this liner out of the drum, fold it around the outside, and run some kind of tape, any kind of tape around the rim to keep that plastic from being pulled into the drum when you load it into the piece of equipment. And secondly, always check the top of the material for any kind of liner. Most chemical companies place a liner on top of the chemical, and if you load that into your piece of equipment without taking the liner off, it will suck that liner up into the machine and tear it up and disperse it through the machine, causing need for major repairs. The procedure is much the same for loading the 55-gallon drum into the system. Making sure the drum is aligned underneath the follower plate, we can lower this switch into the full down position. But before we do that, we're going to open our bleeder valve. This one does not have a 90-degree fitting on it because of the thickness of the material. So I generally use a paper towel or a rag to cover the outlet of that valve as we send it in the down position. I'm going to switch my valve, my elevator switch into the full down position and cover this valve with my hand. Once the follower plate hits the material, it'll stop on its own. You might get some bubbles of material out of the valve inside of the drum. And wipe that off as clean as you can. Then we move to step 2. We're going to prime the side of the pump with a cup. Just like the 5-gallon pail, we have a bleeder valve on the side of our pump. This one's in the inside. And I'm going to open that bleeder valve just a couple turns, and I'm going to use my cup to catch material underneath that bleeder valve. And I'm going to use my base side ball valve for my base air motor to throttle open and actuate this pump. You're going to want to run this pump until you see a smooth flow of chemical into your cup and there's no air spitting sporadically out of the pump. Once you see the material flowing, turn off your air ball valve and then close the bleeder valve on the side of the pump.